Everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here. I have a terrifyingly little time with someone like Aruna, so I'm going to get straight to it. So, I've had the chance to read and be with this book and be in conversation with Aruna a couple of times now. And it is, for me, an extraordinary honor to be with somebody who I consider a mentor, a teacher, a friend, a fashion comrade. We did coordinate outfits this morning. And to very, it's true. It's the aesthetic is also personal and political. And so I'm going to open it up as much as possible and as quickly as possible. So I want to say just one thing about this book before I ask Aruna my first question, which is to say, when you think about the subtitle, an activist's memoir, I just want you to think about why that is different from just being a memoir. There's a lot of people who are very curious about Aruna's life. There's a lot of people who thought and looked to this memoir as the story of a single person. And I think one of the most astounding things about this book is that it actually tells you that an activist memoir cannot be the story of a single person. And the kind of collective history that is told here is that it's really a memoir of movements. It's a memoir of places, it's a memoir of people, it's a memoir of collectives and sangharshas and morchas, not just of the MKSS, not just of the right to information, not just of multiple, the People's Action for Employment Guarantee, the Pension Abhiyan, the fight against silicosis in Rajasthan. It is a memoir that, in the best of the traditions of a memoir, meanders through the stories of movements, moments, places, and activism. And there is, in the book, in the reading of the book, a feeling that I can only describe as orality. It feels like the history of storytelling that Aruna talks about, that the women of Rajasthan and her spoke to each other in. It feels like that language. It feels like a river that decides to turn left or right when it itself doesn't know which way it's going to go. There are moments when she'll be talking about one thing, and then she'll be like, and then you can imagine that someone like Nikhil Dey or Shankar Singh has come with a cup of tea and she's forgotten what she was writing, and then there'll be 3 pages on something else, and then she will come back, and then it'll be back to the campaign and back to the movement, and you sit there, and the absence of linearity, the absence of forcing a structure on a messy life, none of it is there. It is allowed to be that story. And I talked to her about this orality once, and she said, when a woman tells you a story sitting on the floor of her house, she keeps getting interrupted. The children come, the tea boils over, she's got an eye on the left, she's got a cook on the right, she's watching things, one hand is here, a second hand is here. She said no woman tells a story uninterrupted, and we never speak in straight lines. And the memoir reads like this meander. It reads like this river. It is glorious, actually, as a moment to settle in. So when you're flipping from page to page and say, but what happened to that movement when you sat on that dharna? Just wait. Somewhere along the line, she will remember she was talking about it, and she will come back, and so will us. Okay? So, I wanted to start with the idea of a memoir of an activist, and to talk to you about what activism means to you. And I'm going to keep reading just small lines from this as we start. So you say, the slogan, the personal is political. The slogan gives a theoretical niche for 2 things, 2 beings I shelter within my body. The first, a capable, confident social activist sure of herself. And the second, a questioning woman who asks as many questions of herself as of others. The first welcomes confrontation if necessary to fight injustice and inequality. And the second one believes that there is room for compassionate dialogue. For the outside world, I am stereotypical and categorized. For myself, I am complex and beyond cataloging. What does it mean to live like an activist, to be an activist?
Well, I think we're all activists at some level. It's nothing extraordinary to be an activist. I think in bits and pieces, we're all activists. I think all human beings act with compassion when they see injustice when they see violence, when they see hatred, there is an instinct in us to protect, to speak up, to ask. The interesting part of this was that though I wrote this in kind of seclusion, though there was no Nikhil or Shankar coming to give me cups of tea, instead of which they were waving a baton at me saying, you better finish the book because you've sat on it for too long. But when I sit down to write, I had a dilemma. And it's a question that many women may understand, that we all fight for women's logic. That since Virginia Woolf, who wrote her book, A Room of One's Own, we've stated that we have a way of writing which is distinct and different. Even in very important meetings, even when we were fighting for legislations, what a woman said was somewhat different from what a man said, though both of us wanted the legislation at the end of the road. So while the man's language is very technical, and very correct and very legalistic, the woman's language, wanting the same end, can be quite different. So that was one, I think, that I wanted to bring out in the book. The second thing is that it was a much more difficult space, because nowhere have I acted alone. I've thought alone, but I've never acted alone, because no activist can act alone. Every single success that came to the MKSS was because it was a collective. The right to information law was because there was an enormous collective in India that wanted the law. And on what basis do I claim anything, or how do I become the single voice for a thing, a movement which had hundreds and thousands of Indian voices? So there's always a guilt that am I taking away from somebody what is theirs? But I do think that the individual voice has a space which allowed me this morning or yesterday when we spoke, well, what color sari are you wearing? And am I going to color coordinate with you or not? Is no man would ever say. And Gautam in that sense is extraordinary. Now this kind of conversation is not a male conversation, it's a female conversation, it's a woman's conversation. So I think the space for that is very important, and it's because I entered those spaces and I talked to people about trivialities, what appear to be trivialities, what appear to be inanities, what appear to be unimportant, that actually there was such large involvement in the Right to Information campaign. Today, we are more than between 60 to 80 lakh users every year, in spite of all that they are doing to cripple the RTI. We still continue, and every single user of the RTI law thinks it's his or her law. Yeah. They don't think it's someone else's law. Yeah. The claiming of that space as yours is democracy. But for that, to achieve that very democratic end, to achieve that political end, you have to begin with the personal. And in that personal, when you sit and talk over the chula, or drinking water, or drawing water from the well, there is an intimacy and an understanding which goes far beyond. And we women understand that there is no public action which is not emotional. Today in India, we know what's happening. The psychological and the emotional is being played upon to such an extent that we are losing sight of the constitutional values, we're losing sight of so many things which we hold dear. But if that is so, then we have lost space because we haven't accepted that space. Yeah. So it may have been critically important.
And I think there's, we'll talk more about what your thoughts are on democracy in a second. I want to stay on this question of activism. You said in an interview after the book that you wanted the book to get into the hands of people for whom activists and activism has become a scary word, that associated with the anti-national. She said, this is a misunderstanding of who activists are, right? Of the compassion that drives activism, not just resistance. So let me read about anger and compassion from your book. The activist has to remember that personal anger and angst can destroy public action, and that the battle espouses the value of compassion. Prolonged battles against criminal violence can create a desire for revenge. As an activist, one needs constant vigilance to keep the demand for justice untainted by any need of revenge. Sadly, compassion is often confused with weakness and justice with indifference. I wanted you to talk more about this idea of compassion versus anger, because so many people think of activism as this idea of that dharna, the protest, the resistance, the anger. But you don't speak of it in those moments. You speak of it in that longer durée of that root of a desire for justice and compassion.
As I said initially, when you see some woman being beaten or a Dalit being beaten, the first response in you or in me is anger, because you feel that this is injustice and that you must stop it. But at that point, do I want injustice or do I want the perpetrator of that violence to be killed? That is the difference between revenge and justice. Of course, I want that perpetrator of violence to go through the process, the judicial process, the processes which ensure that that violence will stop. But do I wish that there should be revenge on that person? The idea of revenge is inimical to justice. The idea of revenge is inimical to compassion. Because revenge means acting exactly as the other person has done for similar ends, which is not what we want. We want justice. And I think politically, very often today, an activist who asks for justice is placed in a space where they are looked at as people who seek revenge. Revenge for what, God knows. But for revenge. So that's one argument that is extremely important. But I really do think that the people who blame us and name us understand what we are doing. But there are people who do not want justice. There are people who do not want any transparency or accountability. They don't want their impunity questioned at any point. So the easiest thing is to pick up on it and say, look, they are disturbers of the peace. So at any point they should be put behind bars. Yeah. Because when there is a dharna, if you are driving your car, you have to seek another route. If you are walking, you will have to walk a little longer. And in any case, a dharna is on the streets. Because which is public intercourse. But for them, it was difficult. So I learned Rajasthani, then I learned many dialects because they keep changing. And I enjoyed doing it. And I also questioned my own sense of inhibition and my sense of shame. Oh, have I said this right? They will laugh at me, etc., which led me to my larger politics of being in the dharna and shouting slogans, because I was a slogan shouter. And everyone used to say, you have a loud voice, so you better shout the slogans. And I said, oh, people will look at me. There's nobody looks at you, just shout the slogans. So that's how my slogan shouting began.
So, as we close, one of the things that memoirs have to do is to cover something over time. And one of the things that I love about this memoir is that it does not seek a kind of, because the linearity is not there, because the river meanders without end, there is no sense of saying, here are the lessons I have learned. There are, in fact, only insistently new curiosities, new questions. Aruna is still wondering about some of the same things she was wondering about 20 years ago. There is no pretense of saying, as my wisdom in my memoir, here is what I have learned and I offer. It really feels like that conversation. In fact, sometimes you're like, give me a life lesson. I read this memoir. Where is it? Right? And I can imagine her cheekily saying, you've already got a few. You will realize them slowly. And that's the feeling of being a reader of this. But two folks here who are thinking of activism, thinking of justice, thinking of fights, trying to seek their own courage. There's a line here when you were talking about an RTI Dharna in 2005. It's an early part. And you say, in the Dharna, for the first time, I felt a sense of harmony between my public and personal journey for an ethical existence. And I was so struck by this idea that, which means there were many times when that harmony would not have been there, where the sense of disjunct would have been there, where that sense of loss, that sense of hopelessness, that sense of what do you want to leave us with in thinking about holding on and keep going and keep moving? This question of saying you're not always going to have a harmony between the personal and the political. The personal is political, but sometimes it's political in ways that break you, and sometimes they're political in ways that heal you. How do we ride these tides?
I think there's no option but to just ride it and take it away to nurse at home and think at home about, did I do right? Did I compromise because what was politically right? Did I hurt anybody? Or did I compromise on an ethical value? The thing about the RTI is that it's about truth. And in any case, if someone said to me, what is your journey? I would say it's a quest. I don't want to quote Gandhiji here because I'm not as big as he was, nor do I claim the profundity of his book. But if he had experiments with truth, all of us do have a journey somewhere to realize what it is, the logic. You can call it logic, you can call it truth, you can call it explanations, you can call it rationality, but we need some explanations. And in that explanation, sometimes you question yourself whether you're seeking an explanation that is really there, or are you imagining it? And that's where I think the question comes, and you go back and you think again. So you have to stop. There's no stopping thinking. I'm 78 today and I'm still thinking.
I tried, but there is the wrong kind of Lal Salam on this screen coming at me. And so she's going to be right here. She's going to be signing books across in the hall right across. And I just want to say one small thing, if Joseph can just come up on the stage. Every call with an activist is a call to action. These are cards that help you connect with MKSS, to know more about it, to contribute to it. One of the most amazing things that is starting is that in one of the places where the RTI started, a town called Biawar in Rajasthan, there is now a new RTI museum, a people's museum on the right to information on the same land where it started. So Joseph right over here and Rennie Joseph, who is going to be at the end right there, are going to have these cards. Please fill them out on your way out so you can be connected with the campaign and contribute to it. There is never an activist who does not take more people along every place they do. So Aruna was like, talking is fine, hold up the white card. Here is the white card, not of surrender, but of peace and of compassion. And I just want to say thank you. From me, there are people tell you not to meet your heroes. I can tell you you should do it once in a while. And for me, these are moments that will charge me and charge all of us. One round for Aruna Roy, please.